Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first World Affairs Council of New Hampshire event of the year. I'm so glad that you've joined us live or for the recording of this amazing conversation that is looking at the results of the German elections 2 days after they have occurred. We're very honored that the Consul General to the New England states from Germany, Dr. Sonja Kreibich, will be joining us here in a moment, and I'll get to her introduction. But first, a few things about the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that is dedicated to helping people better understand the world around them. We've seen a lot of changes over the past several months since we last came together as a community to especially the US's role or perception of its role around the world and how it's been engaging. So we are here as your resource. We are here as your platform for conversations to help you better understand what is going on, how it will impact the United States as well as the world. We are, as I said, a nonpartisan organization, and therefore we do not take any stances on policy, politics, candidates, or anything of that nature. But we do want to highlight critical issues and give you the opportunity to utilize the information that we get from our wonderful speakers and experts to better enhance your own understanding of the world. We are also a community-supported organization. I'm here in our wonderful new downtown Manchester, New Hampshire offices. We are thankful to all of our wonderful donors, sponsors, and supporters, as well as our members for the critical funds that they provide to the organization. If you're not yet a member, we would love to have you join us. We would really appreciate the support in these critical and challenging times. We hope that you will hop on over to our website and check out the benefits that you can receive by being a member beyond just supporting these great programs that you have enjoyed. Okay, with all of that out of the way, I'd like to bring Dr. Sonja Kreibich onto the stage and welcome her as our wonderful expert, and thank her so much for taking on the big challenge of explaining the German elections 2 days after they've taken place, and with a lot of stuff left to figure out, including, how do we understand the elections and how do they form a coalition government, since no one received more than 50% and really more than 30% of the vote. So there's a big task ahead. And we're so grateful for Dr. Kreibich for joining us today. She has been with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for quite some time, having postings at the UN in New York and Bucharest, Romania. From 2018 to 2022, she was the head of division for Pan-African issues for Southern Africa and the Great Lakes, based in Berlin. And now, since July of 2022, has been our Consul General for the New England states. And we are so happy to have you, Dr. Kreibich. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it to you for some initial thoughts on the elections and how we can understand what's going on with your country.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you thank you very much for having me. It's a fantastic opportunity. It's also a bit of a challenge because, as you said, the elections took place on Sunday, and I've been trying to sort through the results and analyzing what they mean. I will attempt at giving you a good presentation of what happened, and then we can have a discussion about what that may mean for the future. I also have to make a disclaimer in the beginning. I'm a civil servant, I'm a government employee, and I'm also bound to be neutral in my statements on political parties and positions. I will strive to do my best in that regard. I have prepared a number of you will see it's not really a slide deck. I haven't had the time, but I always think that explaining something with a bit of visuals is more helpful. So let's delve into let's start with why did we have these elections in the first place? Germany has a 4-year electoral cycle. Our regular next election date would have been in September this year. However, the last governing coalition, the so-called traffic light coalition that comprised 3 parties, did not make it until September this year. The coalition fell apart in November 2024. coincidentally or not coincidentally, on the day after the US elections. And when Chancellor Scholz dismissed Finance Minister Lindner from the Liberal Democratic Party, and that triggered snap elections. There are some special rules surrounding that. I'll not delve into that. But so we've had a very short electoral campaign, also in winter over the Christmas break. It was a very short campaign. What were the issues at stake in the elections, or what were the issues that moved voters? I prepared some representative polls on these issues, and that were taken on election day itself, and it shows you that the most prominent issue for the voters there were actually two equally prominent voters for issues for election for the voters. One was sort of home security and social security, social protections. Home security was an issue that was very much on the minds of voters, also because Germany had experienced a series of attacks on citizens in the streets, knife attacks, most of them committed by recent immigrants. So this was an issue that was very much a topic in the campaign. Social security is sort of the future of the German quite generous social security systems, and how they could be financed in the future. Third topic was immigration, the economic development, how we can find back to a way of economic growth, environment and the climate, still ranking at 13%, which is sort of, if you look at the different topics, they're not that far apart from each other, and peace and security. Inflation, interestingly, even though people mention it quite often, was only ranking at 5% in the sort of in this list of most important topics. The next, I think, next slide. That's also a poll. It's sort of voters were asked what they were most worried about before. And interestingly, the most frequent answer that was given was they were worried that Germany would not have a stable government after the elections. And I will talk about that later. That also relates to coalition government and how to come to a coalition government. Second most important topic that was mentioned was that democracy and the rule of law are in danger. And equally important that, I'm trying to translate that literally, that we are defenseless against President Trump and Putin. And almost as important that Russia's influence and interference in Europe will further increase, and that climate change will destroy that climate change will destroy our sort of the basis for our economy and our existence. And then at 55% that there is too much immigration to Germany. So these were the answers to these questions about what are you most worried about. And just another quick look at what moved people when going to the ballot was sort of economic sentiment. So it's not the objective economic sentiment, but how it is perceived by the voters. And you can see the dark line is the percentage of voters saying it's actually the economy is doing good. And the fainter line is the response to the question is the response the economy is not doing good. And you can see that there was a sort of There was a complete inversion from the two lines in, that would be 23, 22, 23. So the predominant sentiment now, 83% of voters said that the economy is not doing good, and 16% are saying that the economy is doing good. So we obviously have an issue there that needs to be addressed by the next government. So what were the results of the election? I think the most important thing to mention is that we had a record voter turnout. 82.5% of voters participated in these elections. That was the highest turnout that Germany experienced since reunification in 1990. And I think this is remarkable. It also shows that Germany's democracy is strong, it's vibrant, and it's resilient. It also shows that there were many issues at stake that really moved voters and made them participate in these elections. No, that was the wrong. So before I delve into the results, just a quick reminder of how Germany because we vote for members of parliament who then will elect the next chancellor and the executive. And every German casts 2 votes. So you have 1 vote for your local member of parliament and the second vote for a political party. And you do not vote for the party as such, but you vote for a list of politicians that have been nominated by their respective political party in the respective German states, so in the Bundesländer. And then the at least 59, so in total there are 63 seats in parliament. We've had a reform, a parliamentary reform that has significantly reduced the number of seats because our parliament was sort of getting out of proportion. So there are 63 members of parliament, and the about 50% are directly elected from the 299 electoral districts, and the rest is the seats is filled in sort of by proportion on the basis of the party vote shares. And the candidates for these the second half are determined according to these lists that the parties had been prepared before the elections. And then the parliamentarians form a majority in parliament and then elect a chancellor. That's the process. So now, what were our results? How were the seats distributed in the elections? The Christian Democrat Party, sort of center-right party, came out as the winner in the elections with 28. Click to the other side. Sorry for the poor quality of these slides. So they got 208 seats and 28.5% of the vote. The Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, our far-right party, came in second place with a bit over 20%. The Social Democrats, the party that had the largest share of votes in the last parliament, came in third at 6%. The big surprise to many observers was that the party Die Linke, the left party, got 8.77% of the electorate. That was a huge surprise because the Die Linke and the Die Linke is actually sort of the remainder of a party that split in the last year. So there used to be a larger party, and there used to be a grouping in parliament, and then a significant number of parliamentarians split from that grouping and set up a new party, which is also in this list. It's called the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, BSW. And this sort of split off of the Linke had significant results, success in recent regional elections. So the assumption was that they may take over from the Die Linke, and that so the rest of the initial party was doomed to not be represented in the next parliament. The result was exactly the opposite. So the Die Linke fared surprisingly well, and the BSW did not make it beyond the 5% threshold. The same with the Liberal Democrats, who ended up at 4.3%. That's also remarkable. The Liberal Democrats were the third coalition partner in the previous government. So where do we stand now? How do we come from here to a functioning government? And now we enter into the art of coalition making in a multi-party democracy. Very obviously, there is no party that has enough votes to govern on their own. So you need a partner, and under the current system, you need at least, well, the Christian Democrats have the political mandate to enter these discussions, and they also have the political mandate to nominate the future chancellor because they came out first in the elections. As it stands, there is only one other partner that they can team up with politically. Well, in theory there are two, but they have the Friedrich Merz, the chairman of the Christian Democrats, has ruled out before the elections has ruled out any coalition government with the AfD. So this is not an option that is politically on the table, even though they would have a comfortable majority. So the only other coalition partner that is sort of mathematically left is the Social Democrats. And both parties have already indicated the willingness to enter into such talks, even though this process is only starting now, and I will talk a bit later about how this works out. A coalition between the Christian Democrats and the Greens that had been discussed before the election as another option is not on the table because they would not have a majority. Of course, the Greens could, in theory, join the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats in a three-party coalition, but that's neither necessary nor sort of desired by the Christian Democrats. So it's currently really up to the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats to have these talks and form a government. Just one more slide, because before we get out of the slides, this is it's a map of Germany, and I brought that because it really is interesting. It shows you how much Germany is still divided between formerly West and formerly Eastern Germany. So the blue area in the sort of northeast of Germany, that's the former GDR territory, and in almost all of that region, the AfD, the far-right party, came out as the strongest party. And that is not an entirely new development, but it's still a stark contrast. Whilst in the former west of Germany, the Christian Democrats are the party that came out strongest. And with a few exceptions, I can't really zoom into it, but you can see that there are some red pockets in the west. It's mostly the city-states in the north, Hamburg and Bremen, which are still strongholds of the Social Democrats. There are pockets in here very much in the southwest. Down here, that's a stronghold of the Green Party, and it's difficult to see, but I'm trying to move my cursor up here. That's the city-state of Berlin. Berlin, and that was also very much a surprise. In Berlin, the Die Linke, the party that I spoke about earlier, came out as the strongest party. That has also never happened before. So you can also, if you take a closer look at the map, you can also see a difference between urban and rural areas. So I'm now going to stop the. Or can you just click out, remove the? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we
So
gotcha. Thank you so much.
I'm not through with my presentation. I just through with the slides. So just a few words about what follows next. So because you asked about a coalition forming government. So first of all, the new parliament has to have its first formal meeting the latest 30 days after the elections. That's the 25th of March. Up until then, the last parliament is still sitting. And that's actually interesting because right now we're having a debate on what issues the sitting parliament could still address under the previous majority conditions. And there are some really pressing issues that may be addressed by parliament in the next weeks. Before the new parliament meets for the first time. I'll delve into that later. And we will have a caretaker government until the next government is being formed. And this is sort of standing practice, and it's worked well in the past. So we have a functioning government. That's also important for all foreign relations issues that are now on the table. But the old outgoing government will closely coordinate with the most likely future, well, the parties that will most likely form the new government. And then once the new parliament has met, and what is happening now as well is that the parties, as I said, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats most likely are now entering into coalition negotiations, usually send out like a first scouting team, and the parties sit together and hash out areas of sort of joint positions and areas where they would need to compromise. And then over the course of the next week, this will turn into something more concrete. And at the end of these coalition talks, the parties draft what is called a coalition agreement. That's actually a sort of a political program for the next for the next 4 years, and that would be adopted by both party usually by both party conventions, and will be a blueprint for what the parties have been agreed on in the future. And once this is concluded, the parliament will meet and elect the next chancellor, who then in turn will nominate ministers, even though sort of the who gets which ministry and which person gets which job in the new government is usually part of the coalition agreement beforehand. Usually you talk about sort of, well, which party gets which ministry, and then it's the right of the respective party to nominate persons for the respective jobs in the executive. That's, I would like to stop here because this is sort of the presentation side, and now we can delve into questions.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate your great overview. Knocked off a number of my questions already, so that's wonderful. I will note, just for those people watching online, the Consul General's screen has frozen a couple of times, so it's not your computer, it's not your connection. We'll work to ensure a strong connection moving forward, but just wanted to make mention of that. So my first question for you, Dr. Kreibich, is What are those key issues? And I'm not asking you to resolve them for the parties, but what are those key issues that will stand in the way of these broad coalitions coming together? And what do you see as the likeliest path forward?
One of the most pressing issues that the two parties that will now probably enter into discussions have to address is the issue of a budget. And that takes me back to the start of my presentation about why the former the last government actually fell apart before the end of the electoral cycle, and that was over due to disagreement over the budget. And that goes back to a provision that Germany has introduced in its constitution several years ago, which we call the constitutional debt brake. It's a provision in our constitution that limits our sort of, I always forget the correct English term for that. That limits the sort of indebtedness of the German government to, I think, 0.35% of annual GDP. That was it was a provision that was introduced as a lesson from the from the fiscal troubles that plagued the European Union in the 2000s. And back then, Germany was a huge was advocating for fiscal austerity, not only at home but all across Europe. And back then, it was the political consensus in Germany that limiting the taking on of new debt would be a good thing. But we have realized over the last years that it's a limitation. And I know I'm speaking to citizens of New Hampshire. I know how fiscally conservative you are, but in the case of Germany, it has the realization has grown that this may be too limiting, particularly in light of all the security and defense challenges that we are facing in Europe with Russia's attack on Ukraine and the understood need to ramp out our defense spending. And there is no fiscal space for that at the moment. So back in November last year, when the government fell apart, that was actually because of the two parties in the three-party coalition wanted to get more flexibility on spending, and the third party, the Liberal Democrats, insisted on adhering to our constitutional debt brake. So I also mentioned that the previous parliament is still sitting, and a discussion that has now started is whether the parliament should convene in its old form with its old majority and modify this constitutional debt brake that requires a 2/3 majority in parliament. And with this 2/3 majority, you could modify the constitution. It's important to note that the future parliament, both parties to the extreme left and the extreme right taken together would have a blocking majority. So the parties in the center would no longer have that 2/3 majority. So it would be much more difficult to get to such a solution, again modifying the constitution. So that's one of the key issues that have to be addressed. And of course, one of the primary tasks for a new coalition and a new majority in parliament will be to draft a budget for this year. We don't have a governing budget for 2025 yet, because this entire process was postponed after the developments in last year, and some hard decisions will have to be taken. So it's very clear that Germany has to increase defense spending. but the question is, there's also many are calling for more investment in public infrastructure, more public investment in infrastructure, and the question is how this is going to be financed and where cuts will have to be taken in other fields of public spending. So these are issues that the two parties have to discuss amongst themselves, and these discussions will not be easy because they are two parties with two different sets of political ideas, and these are the interesting questions that will arise now.
So what you're telling us is that this will be a super easy process that will be done in just a couple of days, and you won't have any challenges.
No. So Friedrich Merz has actually said that he hopes to conclude this process by Easter, which would be end of April. So that's the aspiration.
Sure. So we know that this is going to take a little while, and whether or not they can get it done by April is up in the air. So what is Olaf Scholz's role maintaining that chancellor position in the caretaker role? And how does the fact that he and other leaders of the major parties have decided to step down from their party leadership roles, does that affect his ability to move some of these things forward?
Well, he would not really be in a position to move these things forward because this is sort of, I refer to the decisions that could be taken in Parliament, but this is separate. It's sort of the legislative and not the executive. But we have a functioning government, and that's particularly important when it comes to foreign relations, because if Olaf Scholz and Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, they're still in office and they will be representing Germany in international fora. But it's also standing practice that if there were important summits that are coming up, I mean, the NATO summit will only be in June. I hope that by then we have a new government. But then you would take, it has happened in the past that you would take the likely next chancellor with you to such summits, for example.
Okay, and speaking of the likely next chancellor, Friedrich Merz, what do we know about him? We know he's new to governments. We know that he is from the conservative Christian Social Democrats. What can you share about his background, his insights, and what that might mean for moving the country forward under the assumption that he does become chancellor?
He has an interesting story. I haven't really prepared for that question, so I'm not entirely sure about dates. But what is interesting to see and important to note is many Americans whom I talk with have long memories of Angela Merkel. And she has been Chancellor of Germany for 16 years. And she has been a dominating figure in German and European politics for those 16 years. Friedrich Merz's career they have never been best friends. So when she became chancellor, she basically made sure that he did not have a role in her government. And when she left office, he took over. He returned from several years outside of politics. He was working basically as a lobbyist. He returned and took over the leadership of this party, and he has moved the party further to the right. I think this is important to know. And whilst Angela Merkel had moved the Christian Democrats very much to the center. This is also important to note because Germany has extensive experience with this most likely next coalition government comprised of the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. We call it the Grand Coalition. But of course, party priorities change over time. So the Christian Democrats of today are not the same party as the Christian Democrats of Angela Merkel's party, and that probably also applies to the Social Democrats.
Wonderful. So assumed Chancellor Merz, or whatever the proper term there would be at this point, had spoken about U.S.-German relations and how he views them, saying that Europe is now 5 minutes to midnight in terms of security, defense, and really needs to beef up its own efforts. Can you give us any insights as to what that relationship between the United States and Germany, which has traditionally been a very strong and important relationship, might see coming down the line in terms of any changes or opportunities to strengthen it?
I think the first thing I would say is that in terms of foreign policy, both when it comes to the transatlantic relationship and the position and the support for Ukraine, both the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats are close together. So the center of German politics enjoys a very broad consensus on these two tenets of Germany's, or the sort of the core tenets of Germany's foreign policy. The importance that we attach to the transatlantic relations, the importance that we attach to our integration within the European Union, and the importance that we attach to a rules-based international order, be it through our membership in the United Nations or be it through alliances like NATO. So there is a very broad consensus amongst all those who are now talking about forming a new government. And Friedrich Merz himself is also, he's often been described as a sort of a very convinced transatlanticist. So yes, of course, the transatlantic relationship is of core relevance to Germany. It's we are so closely intertwined with the US, not only politically but also economically, that maintaining that relationship will be very high on any future agenda. But there's a lot in the air right now.
Yes, of course, a lot to be figured out, and as that coalition building occurs and hopefully comes to fruition, we'll have more clarity. But one of the things that I'd like to sort of wrap up my questions with before we start bringing in audience questions, and please, to our audiences, you can either put it into the YouTube chat function or send it to council@wacnh.org. We'll be monitoring that email and we can enter your questions from there. But for me, one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest concerns in Europe and for many people here in the United States is the Ukraine-Russia war and its potential resolution in any number of ways or shapes or forms. And of course, not looking for any sort of policy insights or how Germany would like to see this resolved. But what are the people of Germany kind of thinking about Ukraine? What are you hearing in terms of the support or lack of support as Germans continue to think about the future of their own country, of Europe, and the world?
Yes, I mean, this is a very timely question. Just yesterday, we commemorated 3 years of this war ongoing, and we also shared our thoughts with the people of Ukraine that have been fighting and defending their country and their sovereignty and their independence for 3 years. German politicians expressed their renewed support for this struggle of Ukraine for its independence and sovereignty. I think everybody agrees that that peace is better than war. and that nobody hopes for peace more than the people of Ukraine. But it also has to be clear that any peace has to be a just and lasting peace that also takes the interest of the Ukrainian people into account, and guarantees the future sovereignty and security of Ukraine. This is why Europe has reiterated over the last days that a sort of a path to a just and lasting peace also requires that Ukraine and the European countries that have been supporting Ukraine and that will definitely play a key role in guaranteeing such a lasting peace have to sit at the negotiation table. So these are discussions that are now being held elsewhere. I'm not part of these discussions, but that's sort of the basic position of Germany. And we hold this position because Ukraine is very close to Germany, and we have seen the impact that Russian aggression. Well, Russia invaded Ukraine. It invaded Ukraine, and it brought war back to the European continent. And this war is very much at our doorsteps. And not many nations in Europe, the Baltic states most prominently, but also others, are very concerned that this is not the last attempt at undermining sovereignty of nations in Europe. And so at the beginning of my presentation, I spoke about sort of topics that worried voters most in Germany's election, and that awareness, acute awareness of war in Europe, and the question whether the rest of Europe could be next, played a huge role in these elections. Of course, there are differences between the voters from different parties. So some of some parties are very pro-Russian, and others are very much in support of Ukraine. So that there's a different picture, but overall, this war is very close to Europe.
Okay. So I know we've got a number of AFD questions in the chat, but we'll hold off on those now because I think this question flows nicely into what we were just talking about. But Zachary Myers is asking, is there a way forward for German-France bilateralism to create a new European security apparatus in the face of potential U.S. abandonment? Any thoughts on that?
Well, this is it. I can't really answer this question right now because this is for a new government to take up. But there is acute awareness that Europe has to sort of, well, it's not a new process. Europe has worked over the last years at at strengthening its security and defense mechanisms, and there's also acute awareness that we may have more self-sufficient in the future. So these discussions will probably happen, but it's too early to say how they would look like in detail.
Of course, but good to know that the conversations are ongoing, and something that we know that Europe has been talking about for quite some time is the U.S. has been a sort of mercurial leader throughout the years, even before our current government has taken over. So one of the questions from our wonderful friend down in Washington, D.C., who I just had the opportunity to say hello to, Patricia Harrison, wants to know what influence, if any, has the Musks and foreign money had on German elections and campaigning. Of course, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance gave his speech at the Munich Security Conference about concerns about free speech, about the ability for parties to get into power, and the example he used of Romania canceling their elections over concerns of Russian foreign influence, and the fact that that might happen in Germany as well, which it has not. We will make that clear for you. But what are you thinking in terms of, what are you seeing and thinking and hearing about in terms of foreign influence in Russian government and election?
We're talking about two different sets of things. One is sort of political statements coming from abroad in support of one or the other political party. That is part of the democratic discourse. And even though you may not agree with what is being said in substance, and both Chancellor Scholz and as well as Friedrich Merz have made that clear, that they that they strongly disagreed with what was being said in substance. This is, as I said, it's part of democratic discourse, sort of on the international arena. But I think it's also interesting when we talk about sort of support from Elon Musk to the AfD. It's interesting to see, if you look at how the AfD was polling in the weeks leading up to the elections. If you take a closer look, at least I couldn't see that it had any impact on their share of votes, and I leave it at that. The other issue is, you spoke about Russian interference. This is a different issue because there was Russian interference or attempts at Russian interference in this electoral campaign in Germany, and that was conducted in a covert way. So it's not President Putin's saying I support candidate A or B, but German security agencies have been tracking this very closely for the last years, because Germany is a prime target of Russian covert interference and Russian disinformation, and this has happened. There have been, for example, instances of substantive. Well, there have been substantive numbers. I'm just looking at this. Our security agencies and units. There's also a dedicated unit within the German Foreign Office that looks into these things, and they have detected over 100 sort of pseudo news websites on the internet that were set up as sort of blanket websites, and could then be filled with like a sleeper websites that would then be filled with news looking like respectable news sites, and would then disseminate disinformation closer to election day. And so we are aware that this is happening. And we've also been able to detect and counteract this type of information. There were also videos distributed on social media that claimed that ballot papers had been sort of forged and falsified, and there was interference with our electoral process. And several of these instances have been detected, and sort of awareness was created for this type of disinformation that's out there. But it's an ongoing struggle, and it's an extremely important struggle, because disinformation undermines trust in democracy, and this is something that we're committed to counteract.
Sure. So bringing in, I'm going to try and condense a couple of the AfD questions into one, and let you sort of take it from there. But people are wondering, where does the rise of the AfD posting their biggest electoral wins in their history, where does that support come from? Do we have any insights into why the eastern part of Russia was more supportive, based on that map you were showing outside of the Berlin area? What are the issues that are driving people to support this party, and what are people feeling about the rise of this party in Germany?
Well, one thing that we can observe in Germany as well as in other countries is an increasing polarization of the political spectrum. It's also, if you take a closer look at our election results, it's also sort of that this is one thing that happened in Germany, and the parties of the sort of the democratic center, as we call it in Germany, are commanding a smaller share of the total vote, and the AfD has grown on an anti. Well, it has a long story, and it started as something very different, but it has been grown on an anti-immigration, anti-establishment, and also pro-Russia platform. And there are several, certainly, reasons why they're stronger in the east of Germany. That ties into widespread sentiment in the east of Germany that that part of Germany sort of lost out in the reunification process. If you look into economic data, for example, there are still wealth discrepancies between West and East. There are discrepancies, sort of there are almost no sort of stock exchange listed companies that have their headquarters in East Germany. The East Germany has been has seen negative demographic developments over the last decades because young, motivated people tended to leave the region. So there's also this feeling of being left out, and a party that has been able to pick up on these sentiments.
Yeah, and this is certainly a trend that is not, we don't only see in Germany. It's a trend we see in many other European countries and here at home as well. We just got a really interesting question from Mallory, and she's wondering what role social media played in the German elections, from Elon Musk, AfD's leader on X, and Die Linke doing so well with TikTok.
Well, that's actually a really interesting development. As I said, I personally was totally surprised by the success that the Linke had in these elections, but that may be because I'm not on TikTok, so I completely missed out on the. I looked into their campaign over the last days because I realized I had missed out on something, and they did a very a very smart campaign that very clearly attracted young voters, and the Linke was the party that fared best with the young electorate. So yes, it has had an impact. It's also the AfD has been strong on TikTok for a long time. That may also play a role. And sort of support for the AfD on X. I mean, this is for experts to look into how this really played out, and whether there were sort of algorithms that were doctored with. I don't know. There's an investigation at the conducted by the European Commission at the moment. But yes, social media has played a very important role, and I think the case of Die Linke is the most telling.
Yeah, we've always considered how to get on TikTok for the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, but it seems overwhelming to create even more content and make it all that more fun and engaging. So kudos to those people who are really doing great work in those spaces. So Steve from Manchester is wondering, what happens if the two parties cannot get together on a coalition? Do you have new elections? How long would that process potentially take? Can you give us some insights into what that would look like?
Well, we've had a situation like this 8 years ago, when there were talks about what what would then have been called a Jamaica coalition, so a coalition between what was that again? So there were coalition talks where the in the end, the Liberal Democrats barked out at the last minute. Sort of the Christian Lindner, the still chair of the party, famously said it's better to not to govern than to govern in the wrong way. So they barked out at the last moment, and then the parties had to readjust, and they were sort of, this is when our federal president also informally comes into play, and he then talked to the parties and convinced back then the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats to again form a grand coalition, even though the Social Democrats had already sort of resigned themselves or had already seen themselves in the opposition. So if these talks fail, there has to be a second attempt. This time it's not so easy because there aren't that many options. Then you could still govern with a minority government. That is something that is currently being tested in one of the German federal states. Then if that doesn't work, you would, and this has never happened before in Germany, but then of course, if you see that you do not get a functioning majority, you would have to restart the process that led to these snap elections that we had just now. So you would the sort of the head of the executive would have to ask for a vote of confidence, and if he doesn't get a vote of confidence in parliament, then the process for new elections would be triggered.
Great, thank you for that that explanation. So Zachary wants to follow on to our social media question. What measures has Germany taken to combat mis and disinformation online?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean with online, because most disinformation is spread online. So I just take it as a general question. As I mentioned, there are several sort of units within the federal government in Germany that are set up to sort of to detect disinformation, not so much the individual disinformation, but more structures and strategies behind that lead to the spread of disinformation, at least in the case of the Foreign Office. So we now have a unit at the Foreign Office that is looking into what's happening online, and I spoke about these Russian sleeper fake news platforms. I spoke about Russian bot factories. And we're analyzing these. We're sharing information on these topics with other European partners and the European Commission, and then we are also sort of informing the public about these events. We have sort of about these structures, and we're also raising awareness of these topics. Another important instrument for Europe, of course, is the Digital Services Act that was came into full effect last year, and which has which requires very large sort of social media platforms to counteract to have their own structures and take measures against the spread of disinformation. And I think this will, they have looked into these topics more closely over the last year.
Great. Well, we're coming up to our hour here, so I want to take a moment to thank you, Dr. Kreibich, for your insights and your willingness to take on some of the challenging questions that we've posed to you today as a diplomat. And I really appreciate the insights you were able to provide for us. And thank you to everyone who joined us here live. We've had some great conversations. And for those who will be watching the the recording. We're looking forward to future conversations. So thank you so much, Dr. Kreibich, and thank you so much to our audience for this great conversation.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for having an ear, sort of providing that platform to let me talk about Germany. There are some interesting times ahead of us, and I always cherish this opportunity to have this kind of dialogue.
Well, we appreciate it, and we know as the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire how important the relationship between the U.S. and Germany has been. We've done a number of programs over the years on that topic, and again, really appreciate your time. And we'll check back in with you in a few months once the government's together and we have a bit more clarity. But I really appreciate you taking the time to so quickly turn this around for us.
Thank you.
All right,
and you're welcome to check in a few months' time.
All right, thanks so much.
Right.
Have a great day, everyone.